was out camping in the woods with a group of friends when we encountered something that still gives me chills to this day. It was late at night, and we were huddled around the campfire telling ghost stories and roasting marshmallows. Suddenly, we heard a strange noise coming from the trees. It sounded like a low growl, but it was unlike any animal noise we had ever heard before. We shrugged it off and continued with our night, but the sound grew louder and more frequent as the night wore on. At one point, we heard something moving in the bushes nearby. We shined our flashlights in that direction of the noise, but we couldn't see anything. It was too dark and too dense with trees and brush. As the night progressed, the noises grew more and more intense. We could hear something moving around our campsite, but we couldn't see anything in the darkness. It was like something was watching us, stalking us from the shadows. We decided to pack up and leave, but as we started to gather our things, we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the trees. It was a sound that made our hearts stop in terror. We could feel something watching us, waiting for us to make a move. We ran as fast as we could back to our car, but we could hear something following us. It was like the creature was right on our heels, breathing down our necks. We finally made it to the car and sped away, our hearts pounding in our chest. To this day, we still don't know what kind of creature it was that we encountered in the woods that night. It was something unknown and unexplainable, something that still haunts our memories and makes us shiver with fear. To start this off, I'm a 29-year-old male, and 3 times a year I head up to the Georgia mountains to camp, fish, and have a great time. But after last trip, I doubt I will ever go again. I'd been super excited the week before I was headed up to Georgia, and when the day finally came, I could have died with happiness. I loaded up my dog buddy and all my gear and started the trip. About an hour into my trip, I saw a road that I had never seen before. I decided I would take an hour to look around and go back to the main road. I lost track of time, and before I knew it, the sun was setting. I grabbed my gear and buddy, and we hiked about 10 minutes before finding a nice clearing in the forest. I set up camp and looked around my camp. I saw a small, man-made trail leading into the dark trees and decided that me and Buddy needed a walk. I grabbed my walking stick, Buddy's leash, and the headlamp, and we headed onto the trail. I knew something was wrong when I couldn't hear a single insect or animal. Me and Buddy stopped at a little creek when I saw something terrifying. 2 eyes reflecting from my headlamp. This thing was really tall, like 6 or 7 feet, and the eyes were way too big to be human. My dog is usually very protective of me, but instead of barking or doing something, he whimpered and peed on my leg. I've never seen him act like this before. He's seen bears before, and he scared away mountain lions, but he's never peed on me. As Buddy kept whimpering, I felt terrible, like this thing hated me, and it could rip me to shreds if it wanted to. Then, it made the scariest noise I've ever heard. It sounded like a maniac screaming. Me and Buddy bolted back to our camp. In our camp, I could still hear the thing. Needless to say, I wasn't staying here. I packed up the camp as Buddy stood watch. We ran to the truck and got out of there. I went straight home and didn't sleep that whole night. Later on, I looked on the internet of what could have made that noise. Nothing came close to it. I really don't know what that was, but there's something weird in the woods of Georgia. My dad runs a church camp for the mentally disabled. When I was 4, he brought me along and I had a great time, but for a different reason. I love catching and collecting all the insects there. I always release them on the last day of camp. Ever since then, I've been going with him to help out and look for bugs. In 2011, we stayed in a cabin since the year before we stayed in a tent, and mosquitoes almost ate us alive. The cabin had a hallway with 4 rooms, 2 on each side, so my dad and I used the first 2. On the second day at camp, I was alone in the cabin while my dad went off to set up stuff. I decided to play with my Lego Indiana Jones minifigures while I kept the insects I collected near me. Around 10 minutes pass, and I begin to hear a shaking and scratching noise coming from somewhere in the cabin. I chalked it up to being my bugs scratching the little habitat windows I put them in, but when I checked on them a bit later, they were completely silent. I still heard that noise, so I went to inspect the cabin. While going through the hallway, I checked every door. When I got to the third door, I found what the noise was. The third doorknob was shaking by itself. Being around 7, I immediately ran out and found a counselor nearby. The counselor, thinking it was an animal, opened the door, which wasn't shaking anymore, and started trying to scare it out. Of course, there wasn't anything. Before leaving, he said it must have been the wind. Years pass, and I'm at a McDonald's with some of my staff. I told them the short version of my story, and they said they've all had paranormal experiences at the camp. One of them even said that one day she was alone in the manor and heard footsteps, but when she checked who was there, no one was to be seen. A few summers back, I worked at a camp that was nearly 100 years old. The camp served adults and kids with varying levels of ability of all ages, and was really the highlight of many of the campers' lives. Campers and workers alike joked the place was haunted, but I had thought it was one of those funny camp legends to mess with campers and share around the fire. As a camp leader, I had my own room in an old cabin, and I shared a bathroom with one other leader who lived on the other separate half of the cabin. One night, I was up late dealing with a camper having a meltdown. Around midnight, I had finally gotten her to sleep, and I was trekking back to my own cabin when thunder roared. I sprinted the rest of the way, and as soon as I hit the door, it started pouring. I realized at this moment that I still had my walkie-talkie on me. Usually we charge them in the main office at night, but I decided not to run back into the storm. I turned the walkie-talkie off and set it on my dresser. Shortly after that, I went to bed. I woke at around 3 a.m. to what felt like someone poking my leg. I was really confused by this sensation. I opened my eyes and looked down at my leg under the sheet where I had felt the poking and saw nothing. I tried to go back to sleep, but a few seconds later, I felt it more aggressively and on a larger scale, as a whole hand had wrapped around my calf, and I sat up in fear. As I sat up, my walkie-talkie across the room lit up and beeped, something that could only happen if someone physically turned the side dial and pressed the button. The walkie-talkie stayed on, and I was paralyzed in fear. Eventually, I got up and turned it back off and turned on the room's lights. I checked that no one was in my room or under my bed or in my closet. There were no objects that could have caused the poking. To this day, it still makes me feel tight-chested thinking about it.